Today's topic is in spiritual values in this age of information technology. You may remember that in the last session I discussed some very important I won't call them drawbacks, the impact of information technology in society, in culture, and how it influences our concept of human values. So I was dealing with a few topics like, for example, the tyranny of pragmatism, a paradigm shift from life-oriented goals to momentary short-term goals. Just as the computer screen won't remain there for long, so also there is a shift from long-term life-oriented goals to short-term, immediate, tangible, visible goals to be achieved in life. And a few other important points he touched upon. Now today I'm going to begin by discussing the other side of information technology. I don't know how far this is so much appreciated in this part of the world. Maybe it is not as relevant here as it could be in India. Now in this country, the dignity of labor, equal opportunities, at least from a constitutional point of view, equal opportunities, the ability to take risk, innovation, freedom from the hierarchical tyranny, all these great characteristics of the classic American political experiment. We are all familiar with that. In that respect, even the founding of American nation is considered to be a kind of political innovation in the history of political thought. If you want to see the real relevance of this statement, you can just compare the European society as it existed in the early 19th century and America. A vast country with immense resources, equal opportunities for those who are willing to work hard. The sky is the limit. Again, I had to modify this statement. I'm not forgetting the problem of, the institution of slavery. Even the founding fathers, at least many of them were owners. They owned large number of slaves whom they employed for working in the farms. And I'm not forgetting that aspect. Relatively speaking, the American experiment was certainly a political innovation in the history of political thought. So many of these values that I'm going to discuss right now, which were actually contribution from information technology in India, were already inherently present in America. So that's why I'm taking the other side. You will be surprised to know that in Indian context, information technology had played the role of a great social reformer. You may remember an early statement, in India it was caste, in Europe it was class, in America it was cash that decided status, that decided the social mobility, that determined the principles of social mobility and social progress, individual achievement. So, in India, you'll be surprised, there have been many movements in the 19th century which were aimed at eradicating social injustices, the wide gap between the rich and poor, and especially the problem of casteism. In fact, to fully appreciate the role of information technology on Indian society, at least as it is very much felt in the large IT hubs of India, you should get a picture of what it was like in Indian context. Casteism was a vertical and horizontal barrier. In every country, some kind of barriers always existed from community to community, but they are called horizontal barriers. See, you are born into a poor family, and if you lived in England in the 18th century or 16th century, only members from a few families were allowed to become to reach the top position in the Admiralty, to become members of the House of Lords, or to become prominent judges and lawyers. So a kind of class distinction very strongly existed in England, and also in Germany, the military aristocracy in Germany, and also in a much more rigid style in Japan, in China, in all these countries. Some kind of strong horizontal barrier. We know why it is called horizontal barrier in the language of sociology. You can always somehow try to cross those barriers. A good-for-nothing loafer who came from England to India, Robert Clive, he tried to commit suicide 3 times, and 3 times his pistol didn't work. So finally he gave up his attempt to commit suicide, and he got employment in an old steamship that was sailing to India, and his job was to push coal in at about 70 degrees centigrade, not Fahrenheit, burning heat. That was the job he got, and in return he got cold water and black bread in his own language. This man went to India, and he enlisted himself as a soldier in one of the native armies. And he played one king against the other king. So every battle was fought by Indians against Indians, mind you, in Indian history. Now, this man played this game, and he is supposed to be the founder of British Empire in India. And he was knighted, he was made a member of the House of Lords. Now he is known as Lord Robert Clive. Actually, he was a good-for-nothing loafer walking in the streets of London, whom people now not even look at him. That man could cross the barriers by his own, you may call, recklessness, chicanery, trickishness, whatever you may call, but you can also call them skills, ability, individual initiative. And through his skills, his recklessness, he crossed the barrier and became a prominent member of a British society. This happened in the 18th century, mind you. And that happened in all European societies. By hard work, you can cross these horizontal barriers. So by becoming rich in America, you can be a distinguished politician. Money decides everything. So there is a way to come out of these barriers. So it's called horizontal. You can cross over, you can jump over. But in India, casteism was both a horizontal and also a vertical barrier, which means you're born into a caste and you may become a trillionaire, you'll remain physically, culturally handicapped. You can't move in certain circles because you are born into that caste. So that is the problem of casteism in India. It was a kind of spiritual slavery where the victims, those who were at the receiving end of this casteism, considered to be a blessing. Casteism, its problem was those who were victims of casteism considered the system to be something they deserved, which they have no business to try to cross over. So that was the rigidity of casteism in India. Today, if you go to the huge information technology hubs in India, you find this has almost disappeared. Because people from all caste groups, they have got education. They have access to the best IT universities in India, IITs, or in different elite universities in India. And when I talk about IITs, recently I read a book in which said IITs are not included among the top schools in the world because they are not willing to invest money with the lobbying groups who give ranking to education institutions. So bigger universities in the world will spend billions of dollars, bribe the lobbying groups to get them ranked at the top level so that a graduate from those schools will get job easily. But IITs, from IIT students come here and within no time they reach the top of MITs or Harvard. You know why this happens? I will explain to you. In India, there are information technology towns where students are trained for examinations for entrance in IITs. There are towns, and these towns are located not in the most advanced cities of India, places like Kota in Rajasthan and all that. Hundreds of thousands of students studied, and they give training for entrance examinations in the information technology universities. And when parents bring their children to the examination halls and wait in the car outside for them to finish the examination to come out. So parents won't allow children to make a cup of coffee. They think it's a waste of time. You should study hard. You should work hard. So they won't allow children to make a cup of tea and coffee. If you want information, you can see American YouTube, the American academics, professors, MITs have prepared these information channels. Now what happened? These children will be forced to study, work hard, day and night, to prepare themselves for entrance examinations in the IITs. And they, with that kind of hard, back-breaking work, that background, they come here and they quickly reach the top schools here. So what is happening, this is accessible to everyone. So if you go to these big information technology hubs in India, you find people, students from all over India, from all groups, all caste groups, whose grandparents had no access to education. These children, these youngsters, they work hard and the government subsidizes everything. The government provides them free books, uniforms, free hostel facilities, even transportation. These students had to pay only 1/3 of the ticket fare by trains if they travel. So government has highly subsidized education in India. I will tell you one truth, many young Indian graduates may not have spent more than $4,000 to get a master's degree in these top IIT, in the top information technology universities. And they come here, they quickly get a job beginning with maybe $6,000 per month. Whole educational career, they may not have spent more than $4,000 worth of Indian currency. So in India you find education is so heavily subsidized. Books are available, uniforms are available, tuition fees are waived, transportation facilities are given. And if they belong to certain categories at the lower level of social or economic categories, they are given everything free. And plus maybe 1,500 rupees, 2,000, not now, 20 years back, that's what I was told by those who have gone through this system. I'm not an IT man. That's why I'm able to speak. They won't speak to you. I don't belong to that IT stream. That's why I'm able to talk to you. But you have to sit on the sidelines, then only get the whole view, If you're part of it, you won't get the correct picture. So what happens, this has actually made education, facilities, opportunities available to everyone in India. So you find among the great social reformers of India who tried to break these casteist barriers, to bring some kind of economic equality and social equality. The list begins with 19th century Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekananda, Gandhi, and many others. They all tried, but that was long before information technology entered the scene of world culture. So now what happens, education, especially IT education, brings a lot of money, prestige, facilities, and their children is a top. So if you go to India, some of the ashramas where I have worked, a poor man may be getting small cooks. Remember, India is not well known for high dignity of labor. Somebody becomes a cook because he is not well educated. So that's a very, very, very unfortunate background. But he's dreaming of sending his son to the best IT schools. And it really happens. It's not a dream. It really happens. Within one generation, they climb this ladder from lower income group to advanced middle income, middle class level. So you find there's a sudden quantum leap that happens in Indian society. It has been happening for the last 20 years. It's still continuing. So what I'm telling you, this is a gift, this is a boon of information technology. So in the last session I was talking about its effect on some of our cultural values. Sometimes we forget the tradition, sometimes we neglect the importance of classical education. All this I mentioned in the last session. But this is a very unique phenomenon. That's become part of the IT culture. And it is happening in different ways all over the world. In India, it is much more strongly and intensely felt against the background of this thousands of years old hierarchy. So you find another interesting thing. Many of these youngsters who get education, who may not have gone to schools, who may not have bothered to study Bhagavad Gita or Vedanta or Veda, after getting this education, they come to think of their great cultural heritage. And as a result of this, after they have already solved many of the problems of unemployment or poverty or backwardness, economic, social backwardness, they start thinking of higher spiritual values. So they go back to the ancient roots. This is happening. Why I mentioned this? This may not be so strongly felt or experienced in the Silicon Valley, because social equality, equal opportunity for all these were part of the inherent aspects of American socio-economic experiment, so to speak. But in India, it's in a very ancient nation, which had preserved these ancient values, but these values were frequently confined to a few people, a small elite, Sanskrit educated, orthodox, conservative circle. But now it has come out of that tiny group, and you find youngsters who have got this high-end education, information technology, who have got good jobs, who have solved their basic problems of existence, are now turning to their own spiritual values. And this is happening all over the country. So what I mean to say, information technology sometimes plays the role of a social reformer in the context of a country like India. And I'm sure this has happened more or less in an identical way in other countries like China. Of course, much earlier it happened in Japan, and many of these countries had this baggage of inherited cultural hierarchy, cultural traditions. So this is a very, very important thing that happened in India. Again, for example, something like dignity of labor, knowledge for all. Again, the idea that you can take your destiny in your own hands. You can innovate a new industrial or technological project, taking risk on yourself, and ability and willingness to take risk many of these qualities which are natural in American social structure were not so common in the highly hierarchical societies of Asia, including Asia and Far East Asia and also South Asia. You may have read many books on how Japan lost the battle for IT domination. In fact, Japan was a pioneer in many of the earlier electronics areas, Sony, they were pioneers. But, Japan is a very conservative society. People won't easily accept a new idea, a new innovation, a new formula, a new project. People won't support. But in America, especially in Silicon Valley, they are willing to support any new idea. If you have a new idea, you can just go ahead. I recently heard about one gentleman in India who had education in one of these elite IT universities in India, and also had an MBA. And that, what he turned to? He invented a new method of making vadas. Vadas is a kind of South Indian breakfast item. A new method. So he innovated some new machinery, with the result that he became a millionaire in a matter of a few years. So this the rags to riches stories are so common among people who took to this. This may sound absolutely unbelievable, but this is happening. So anyone can feel, if I have an idea, I can work upon it. This would not happen if information technology had not entered the scene of world civilization. See, if you study physics or chemistry or mathematics, still there is a lot of the old conservative mindset that remains intact. But here, you sit in your room, you work with a computer, you get a new idea, and if you have the willingness to take risk, the intellectual courage, you start a project and you make a difference in your own destiny. This actually kind of flattens all the established social structures and brings in a kind of equality. So equal opportunity for all, equal opportunity, equal access to knowledge, and equal acceptability, and total freedom from the inherited casteist structures, which had a destructive effect on the human initiative. All these are the gifts of, one way or other, information technology. Scientific education, technical education may be helpful, but it won't give you the same access, the easy access as the information technology gives. So this is what I wanted to mention at the very beginning to balance what I said in the previous session. Of course, along with that, the problem is a cult of superficiality, a worship of, as I mentioned, momentary success, an emphasis on immediate, tangible goals. These are some of the problems. So again, the tyranny of pragmatism, the tyranny of utilitarian emphasis. So that's the problem of it. On the one hand, it plays the role of a great social reformer, crushing the established hierarchical social superstructures, which kept people bound within tiny cells for centuries. These chains have been broken and they have got freedom. Now the problem is, again, this leads to a kind of cult of superficiality. And again, an emphasis on tangible, immediately visible goals. So whatever you do, You link your actions to some immediate, tangible goals. And those goals should always manifest in the form of a few extra dollars or a few extra thousands of rupees, depending upon where you are living. So that's the main problem. So I would tell you, there's a great statement in Vivekananda, long before century, at least some 12 decades before information technology entered human civilization. Vivekananda makes a very interesting statement, and that is relevant to our times. His statement is this: what we need today is a harmonious blending of the best of the Occidental and the best of the Oriental, best of the modern and best of the traditional. This is what Vivekananda makes a statement. And he considered this synthesis and harmony without friction of the best of the traditional and best of the modern as the foundation of his concept of an ideal education and his concept of an ideal society. It's a very far-reaching statement that Vivekananda made when he was in this country. And he repeats the same statement when he went to India. In fact, in the Colombo to Almora lectures, the 3rd volume, he repeats this idea 4 or 5 times. And in this country also, Vivekananda mentions this idea. A synthesis and harmony of the best of the traditional and best of the modern, best of the Oriental, the Eastern, and best of the Occidental, the Western. Of course, in today's terms, you cannot clearly draw a line of demarcation. The world has become one. You have to keep that in mind. Vivekananda made this statement when sociologists and philosophers and historians still interpret human history in terms of the Occidental-Oriental equations. Even that trend continued right up to the great British historian, is Arnold Toynbee, who is considered to be the greatest historian of 20th century, who elevated history to the status of philosophy. History is not just a list of events, not a list of kings and emperors and their activities. Rather, this underlying message, an underlying implication, which is relevant for the whole humanity. So history he interpreted as a great philosophy. It is a definite message of human destiny. So this emphasis. Now, why this emphasis? By this emphasis on harmony and synthesis. Now, harmony implies one important thing: total freedom from friction. That is what is one uniqueness of harmony. When you feel harmony within, you feel a total lack of conflict, inner conflicts, skepticism, self-doubt. You are in tune with what you think, and what you think is in tune with what you do, and both in tune with your words, your everything, personality. So this is called harmony. So harmony implies total freedom from friction, total freedom from any kind of inner conflict. That's why Vivekananda, synthesis, coming together, joining together, but harmonious synthesis. Now, how we can achieve that? Perhaps information technology gives some clues to that. See, it's a mighty tool in our hands. A strong tool, which I mentioned here just now, played the role of a social reformer. Where Gandhi apparently failed, information technology succeeded. If we go to Bay Area, for nearly 400,000 Indians you find. People all more or less relate to information technology. They've forgotten their roots, the undesirable aspects of their roots, that's what I mean. The casteist barriers, the differences, the distinctions, which kept the society bound for thousands of years, not hundreds of years, remember. It's an 7,000 years old society. With all the great spiritual heritage, eventually during the last 2 millennia, these this social evil of inequality, it crept into Hindu social structure for the last 2000 years. Not during the Vedic times, but during the post-Vedic times. So, information technology gives education to everyone, opportunity to everyone, and the willingness to take courage, take decision, and take risk and to go ahead to everyone. You can sit in your room with the computer in your hands, you can become a millionaire if you have got the brains, if you have got ideas and the willingness and the courage to experiment. This happened in a way in China also. Some of the recent studies on Chinese society, also more or less reveal the same identical effect on this ancient social structure. Hierarchies are being broken and people are getting freedom. Of course, I am not talking about the political aspect. That's a different story, this is not the right platform to discuss those aspects. I'm talking about the direct effect of information technology on social value, social structure. As I mentioned earlier, Vivekananda emphasized that this synthesis and harmony should be achieved without any friction. Because friction is a problem. Fragmentation, lack of integration, differentiation, all these are some of the problems, But information technology, as I mentioned, is a mighty tool in your hands. It can be used to spread spiritual values. It can be used to spread positive, constructive, creative values. The internet, the web, and different tools of information technology can be used as a mighty constructive tool for spreading positive values, spiritual values. Of course, I mentioned earlier, one of the casualties of information technology, language, So, that's again mutilation of language, fragmentation of language, murder of this sublime tool in our hands. Why language is considered to be a sublime tool? Language is considered to be an expression of the divine. Again, this is something that information technology may not agree with. So, once you look upon language, not just as a tool for communicating idea from one person to another person, but also as a divine entity. I mentioned in the last session Gayatri Mantra. Now, words in Vedic tradition, as I mentioned, it is more than what the letters independently express. A word like G-O-D, each letter, the same G can be used to construct another word which can be totally different from the idea of God. O can be used, D can be used, all that. Now, in Vedic hermeneutics, a word, when properly spoken, when properly uttered and used, it becomes a tool for expression of the most sublime spiritual emotions of human beings. There is a famous verse in the poetical biography of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya had a long debate with a great philosopher. He was a ritualist. His name is Mandana Misra. He believed that the Vedas do not contain any spiritual or philosophical doctrines or teachings. Vedas are only meant for those who want to practice some external rituals. And these rituals are meant for bringing material prosperity. So they completely denied any spiritual content in the Vedic literature. This was a school of philosophy called Purva Mimamsa. And this Mandana, this scholar was a champion of this school of thought in the 8th century AD. And Shankaracharya, on the other hand, he believed the Vedas contain some sublime universal spiritual truths. So the debate. The debate lasted for 15 days, and the ritualist philosopher was defeated. After his defeat, he became a Vedantin, became a disciple of Shankaracharya. Then he makes a statement, he says, Goddess Saraswati is the goddess of learning, goddess of words, goddess of language. Went in search of somebody who can do full justice to her. So, Goddess Saraswati, she is the goddess of words and language and ideas. So she was searching for a proper person who will do full justice to her. Who will use words with full justice to spiritual implication. And she found Shankaracharya. Because if you read Shankaracharya's poetry, you may not know Sanskrit at all, you will be transported to a spiritual realm. You may not know the word, you may not know a single word. If you know, then it's much more better. If you just listen to the symphony, the music of Shankara's poetry, altogether 36 poems, you find those words which you don't know meaning of, themselves convey something to you. So those words directly communicate with your soul. And that soul, Atman, is the same for all. For the most literate and also for the most illiterate. So words have a way of communicating some higher truths independent of the literal meaning of those words. That's why in the Vedantic tradition, I shall try to explain this with the help of an illustration from one of the Upanishads. Suppose you listen to, let's say, a wonderful music of Beethoven or Mozart or maybe vocal instrument, or anything, or the great Indian musicians, anyone from anywhere in the world. There are two ways of listening to music. One, you listen to the sound. The other, you listen to the music. Now, if you can only enjoy the music after knowing the language, after knowing the meaning of the words used in the music or the poem, then that poem is not so great. The poem is good, but it becomes a great poem when it communicates something to you, even when you do not know the meaning of a single word in that poem. When the poem is put into music. So that's why, on the one hand, the general sounds mechanism, the sound world, the world of speech, the world of sound, other, the world of meaning. So even if you do not understand the meaning, still the words have a great significance. That's why the prayer in one of the most important classical works of apparently the greatest literary poet. He was not a spiritual teacher or anything, Kalidasa. More or less, he can be equated to, let us say, Milton or Bunyan in English poet, not Shakespeare. Bunyan is the great poets. Kalidasa was a great poet who lived 2nd century AD. He begins one of his greatest works with an invocation. Vagartho iva sambrutto vagartha pradivataye jigada pidaro vande parvati parameshwaro. So on the one hand, is a prayer to God Parameshwara and Goddess Parvati. And he says, the Father, the masculine, that's a divine masculine archetype and the divine feminine archetype, to put in modern English language. The supreme masculine divine archetype and the supreme feminine divine archetype means Shiva and Parvati. So he says they coexist, like the word and its meaning coexist. That's right. So word and its meaning coexist. But then he says the greatest poem has a meaning that goes beyond its verbal meaning. What do you mean to say? Now, coming to information technology, you find language tends to become fragmented, mutilated. This may be one of the side effects of the effect of information technology. But remember, if this paradigm, if this trend continues, eventually people may stop reading the classical works. And a civilization or a culture that forgets its classical roots is heading for a trouble. So, the great classical literary works, the great classical philosophical works, even if it involves a lot of time and effort to study, read them, still they represent they represent a cultural heritage, which if we lose, we will lose something very precious. So very often in the era of information technology, we may get completely detached from these classical roots. I mentioned this earlier. If you read a work like Mahabharata, for example, hundreds of dialogues, hundreds of dynasties, there are philosophical dialogues, discussions, debates, and if you read the great Latin or classical Greek works, which I am not familiar with the original, if you read Homer and Iliad or Odyssey, which I could read only in English, you find these works represent a culture and heritage, is part of the universal heritage of humanity. The one problem in information technology culture is people may not find any of them to be of any practical use to our times, and we may discard them. So judging everything on the basis of practicality and practical benefit can lead to oversimplification, exaggeration, or using superlatives, not using moderate language, giving up the ideals of moderation. Or even fragmenting and mutilating established words. All these can actually create problems. And another area of challenge in information technology is family values, which I already mentioned earlier. So, as I mentioned earlier, in India, information technology has played the role of a great leveler. It has created a new social structure, which is in many ways a great blessing to a society burdened with centuries of social inequalities, divisiveness, and so on. So it narrowed the gap between the rich and poor. But the problem is, in such a society, family values may be a casualty. So if you start judging everything on the basis of practical utility, initiative and innovation, in the process something very precious for the survival of human society may be lost or may be challenged. So that's why Vivekananda said, the best of the traditional and the best of the modern should be harmoniously synthesized. That's what he said. The harmony is a very important factor. A friction-free synthesis. If there is friction, it won't last long. So how to synthesize the best of the traditional, the best of the modern? I mentioned in an earlier occasion the five fundamental duties of an householder in ancient Vedic society. Maybe those values as such may not be relevant today, in today's times. But the basic message has got some importance. So it's called Pancha Mahayajnas. Pancha Mahayajnas implies we should first of all be hospitable to fellow human beings. We should be kind to other members of the existent, like we should be kind to the animal kingdom, we should be careful about preserving the purity, the sanctity of nature, and we should also preserve the spiritual heritage that we have inherited from our ancestors, and we should also be respectful to our elders, the departed souls. These are called Pancha Mahayajna, the Pitri Yajna, Deva Yajna, Brahma Yajna, Nara Yajna, Buddha Yajna. I'm not going to those Sanskrit equivalents, but it essentially means a kind of peaceful coexistence with other members of the living world, so to speak. Now, some of these values can be preserved in modern times. For example, respect for elders, respect for heritage, respect for the animal kingdom, all these values can be preserved. And as a foundation of all this, there is the concept of sanctity and sacredness of human relations in family structure. This is in the Vivekananda specially implied this particular aspect. Perhaps you don't know whether he really anticipated anything like this, because in the late 19th century, science and technology were still more or less at a theoretical level, though many innovations had taken place, this telephone and many things have come up. Still, science and technology had not started threatening the way we look at things. They had not started threatening human culture. So his message of harmonious synthesis of the best of the traditional and best of the modern. Best of the traditional means this sanctity of family life, sanctity of nature, our attitude towards the other members of the living world, animals and other beings, and keeping the sanctity of rivers, mountains, valleys, water, air, and so on. At the same time, keeping up the spiritual heritage that you have inherited from the great, not only spiritual or religious leaders, but also great thinkers, men like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all the great, they all have given us a spiritual wealth, which is actually spiritual, not only philosophical. A wealth that enriched human destiny, human culture. Many of these are likely to be discarded due to the impact of information technology. Other forms of science and technology did not immediately threaten these ancient values the way IT is threatening. Because other manifestations of science and technology did not produce quick result, were not so much obsessed with the immediate short-term benefits. But IT makes us obsessed with immediate short-term practical benefits. So we are likely to consider these ancient values, this heritage of humanity, as something not worth preserving. That's a great problem. So I'm concluding this session today. We have another program in Berkeley. So if you have got anything to discuss, we'll discuss during the interaction. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.